So welcome everybody, and for those of you who are watching this on video, welcome. The topic for tonight is grief and loss, as you know, and you know there's really nothing easy about loss. You know, if you lose somebody, or even you have to lose somebody to have a significant loss, a breakup or a loss of a job. You know, it's we all go through something when we have something unexpected like that happen, or even expected, but it's a loss still. And there's a story about a Zen student who saw his teacher crying. He was crying just after the teacher's son had died, and the student said, "Master," he said, "why are you crying? You told us that everything is an illusion." And his teacher says, "Yes, that's right. Everything is an illusion, but there's no greater illusion than the loss of one's own child." So no one escapes grief, not even a Zen master. And how we experience grief, each of us individually, is different. You know, I'll experience it differently than Lauren might, or than you might, or one of your friends or family might. And even who it is you're grieving for makes a difference. You know, it's not always the same. If it had to happen with one person, you think, well, that's how it works. So the next person, it may be different. It probably will be. My dad died when I was 30, and I didn't have any feeling at all, and that kind of shocked me. In fact, there was some self-judgment about that. How can I not have any feeling at all about it? And for a few days, that was the case. And even after that, for years after that, I doubted my ability to feel anything deeply. So I didn't feel anything for my own dad. In fact, the only thing I really felt shortly after his death was relief for my mom, because she'd been attending to him for a year while he was in a coma. But for my dad, I couldn't find anything. And for years I thought, that's just how it is. I guess I don't feel deeply. That's my assumption. And that was put to rest when Lauren had an emergency C-section, nearly died. The surgeons 2 or 3 times thought that they had lost her, and she was in intensive care for 4 days. And so after that, I didn't have any doubt that I could feel. I knew that I could. And when my mom died, the grief happened not after she died, but before. You know, because I knew she had only a few days or a few weeks, and I was grieving what was going to happen more than what did happen. And the biggest feeling I had when she did go was actually gratitude. Gratitude that I got to be with her for the last few weeks, that we got her into her own home with friends and family around for the last few days, and that her passing was peaceful. And I got to be there. I mean, I just dropped everything so I could be there. My poor brother couldn't. He got laid off the day she died. And before that, he was putting in 18-hour days in service of a company that was going to lay him off, of course not knowing that. So I was really grateful for it. And everybody processes grief in their own way. And Mom's hospice counselor understood that. She was really quite wonderful. She came down a couple of days before my mom passed and said, "You know, your mom's getting close. She doesn't have long. Are there things you need to tell her? Is there anything that you need to forgive her for, or her to forgive you, or is there something that's unsaid that needs to be said?" And she was a few more things like that. And I reacted kind of rudely. You know, I said, "Stop." I said, "I'm a counselor like you. I worked in hospice for 2 years. I really don't want to be counseled right now." I said, "What I'd like is just to have a conversation. Please don't process me." And she was wonderful. She just instantly switched gears and didn't try to take me through a grief process. We just talked and just related to me one-on-one as a person, which is what I wanted. She was sensitive to that, sensitive how different grief is for everybody. And there's so much written about grief that we think we know what it's about. You know, you might. Actually, if you experience it a few times, you know you don't. things like the Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. It said these are the stages you go through, but it doesn't happen that way for everybody. In fact, I had read that she was a little upset that people took it so literally. That first is denial, and then is anger, and then is bargaining. She said it doesn't always happen that way. It happens in different orders. And sometimes a given step doesn't even happen at all near the beginning. And because of how much we think we know about grief, we think there's a right way to grieve. And I saw just a couple of days ago a great article by Patrick O'Malley, I think was his name, called Getting Grief Right. And it's actually about how we don't get grief right, that there is not any getting grief right. It's not about getting it right. It's impossible to get it right. And in the article he talks about a client of his, Mary, and I'll just read the first few things he says, because it's not unusual to have this reaction. He says about her, by the time Mary came to see me, 6 months after losing her daughter to sudden infant death syndrome, she'd hired and fired 2 other therapists. You can imagine what this therapist was thinking. She was trying to get her grief right. And Mary was a successful accountant, a driven person who was unaccustomed to being weighed down by sorrow. She was also well versed in the so-called stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. To her and so many others in our culture, Patrick is writing, that meant grief would be temporary and predictable. She expected to be able to put it behind her and get on with her life. And so he goes that, of course, that wasn't the case with her. It wasn't predictable, and it wasn't linear. And he goes on to say that she had been exhausted from acting better than she felt with her coworkers and her friends, and she needed time and space to process the great loss of her daughter. And that's when the healing could begin. There's a quote in your handout, the very first quote, that I just love. That's why I put it first. It's by Gerald May. He says, "Grief is not a disorder. It's a sign of health, a whole and natural gesture of love." Isn't that beautiful? So grief is not a disorder, it's a sign of health. And so often we take it as a malady. Some doctors and even therapists even take it as this is something we've got to get beyond. But in one way, there's no getting beyond it in a way, because that almost even feels disrespectful to get beyond somebody you cared about. And I'm going to show you a clip later on about a really wonderful interview of Stephen Colbert with Anderson Cooper. Maybe you've seen it. They talk for an hour, and there's one part of it where they're talking about their respective grieving. It turns out they both had a father that their father, each of their fathers died when they were 10 years old. Stephen Colbert's dad died when he was 10. His father and his 2 brothers were killed in an airplane crash. And Anderson Cooper's father died when he was 10, and he had a brother that died some years later by suicide, so he really understood grief. But he was puzzled by something that Colbert had said, and in the interview you'll hear it. He knew that Colbert had said, and these are Colbert's words, he said, "I learned to love the things that I most wish had not happened." I'll read it again. "I learned to love the things that I most wish had not happened," meaning in particular the plane crash that killed his father and his brothers. And Anderson said he also knew that Colbert had gone on to say, what punishments of God are not gifts? So what punishments of God are not gifts? And he was puzzled by that. And he said, "Do you really believe that? Is that really true for you?" And this was Colbert's answer. He says, "Yes, it's a gift to exist, and with existence comes suffering. There's no escaping that." In the interview, he goes on to say, he said he's a devout, practicing Catholic, but he says, I guess I must be part Buddhist to say something like that. But Catholicism is similar. Suffering is an important part of the faith. He went on and says, I don't want it to have happened. I want it not to have happened. I want it not to have happened. But if you're grateful for your life, you have to be grateful for all of it. You can't pick and choose what you're grateful for. If you're grateful for your life, you have to be grateful for all of it. There's a saying that the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. Isn't that true? The hardest things we go through, often it's those things that make us stronger, make us more compassionate, make us more flexible, make us more human. But going through it is never easy. I've got a friend who calls an experience like that an AFLO, AFLO, another effing learning opportunity. Beth, who's here, Beth is up there. She called me about a month ago and asked if I had anything, because if you don't mind me saying this, her dad died, and Sally's husband Dick died shortly before that, not long ago. And did I have any meditations I could recommend for grieving? And I couldn't find anything that felt right, So, but I remembered that Ellen Wolfeld, who was a psychologist and an expert on grieving, did a lot of work with people with grieving and loss and death. And when I was working in hospice, I had a chance to hear him, and what he said and what he wrote in his books was really insightful and profound. So I looked to see what he had written recently, and I found this, Grief One Day at a Time. And usually I don't really get attracted by things like, because it seems so almost tacky, it's like too rote, saying for every single day, come on. But he really has some profound things in here, and I want to read one of them to you. This one happens to be for June 15th. It's a quote of Anne Lamott. He's quoting her now. He says, "You will lose someone you can't live without, and your heart will be badly broken. And the bad news is that you never completely get over the loss of your beloved. But this is also the good news. They live forever in your broken heart that didn't seal back up. And you come through. It's like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly. It still hurts when the weather gets cold, but you learn to dance with the limp." Isn't that beautiful? I just love that line, that they live forever in your broken heart, which doesn't seal back up. And that's a plus when framed that way, because you want to remain open, have your heart remain open. I found some really good videos, too many of them. I found 4 videos, and if I showed them all to you, we'd be here all night. So what I did instead is I made a sampler. I picked some parts of each of them, and you'll have access via a link of what I'm going to show tonight. It'll be a little over 20 minutes, and also the longer versions of them, if you want to explore further. The first is a short film about grief by Jack Kornfield. The video quality is horrible. It's kind of blurry and indistinct, but what he says is really wonderful. And then I include a short piece from Tara Brach, which includes a beautiful poem by John O'Donohue. And then I show a clip of a part of the Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert interview. And I really wanted to show you, like all of everything, and I wanted to make sure you saw something of Frank Ostaszewski, who wrote this book, The 5 Invitations. And he's had more experience than anybody I know in being with people when they're dying. He ran the San Francisco Zen Hospice during the AIDS epidemic. And he would counsel people on park benches and wherever he could. If he couldn't get him into this hospice, he had a residential hospice. And in my book, he's the most articulate and the most experienced in dealing with the process. And if you read his writings, you'll see that he doesn't put anybody in categories. He talks about, I remember going to a workshop of his some years ago when I was still doing hospice work, and he talked about sitting with a fellow who was in his late 80s, a hard, no bones about it scientist, didn't believe in God or anything, the way he would put it. And he says, so you don't believe in anything at all? It's no, nothing at all. He says, so what? He says, you think when you die, it's all over? He says, yep, it's all over. So what would, how did he put it? The way he put it was, so how would you like to think of death? How do you think it is? He's, well, it's just molecules bouncing around. My body's going to decay. It'll be fodder for something else. Maybe it'll be make the grass come up in the cemetery, but it's just kind of things bouncing around. That's the way it is. There's no God. There's no nothing. And Ostaseski says it's a wonderful image, and it was, you know. And that scientist, as hard and cold as he was, had some peace in being heard that way, and also, even though he didn't describe in the sense of going up to heaven, there's some sense of release about it, even if he felt he wasn't going to be conscious. You know, so I always loved how accepting Ostaseski was. So I'm going to show a little bit of an interview of his where he talks about these 5 invitations, and I could fit in the first 3, and you'll have the rest via a link. The first one is don't wait, meaning don't wait for the right time. Second is welcome everything, turn away nothing. The third is bring your whole self to the experience. He's talking about the dying process, but he's also talking about living. Because if you do that while you're alive, I mean, there's really lessons and guidelines for life. And the 4th and the 5th you can find in the expanded videos you'll have. So we'll begin with the meditation. And as we've been doing these, the first 10 minutes will be guided to relate to the theme of tonight. The second 10 minutes will be totally unguided. It'll be silent, and you can make that whatever kind of meditation you would like that to be. And so just making yourself comfortable. And letting yourself just experience being here, whether sitting on a folding chair or a padded chair or the couch or on the floor, just feeling the support you've got from the ground through your feet or from what you're sitting on. Feeling how your weight is supported by what you're sitting on, by the couch or the chair or the floor. The actual sensations of contact, of pressure, of weight. Noticing how your arms are resting in your lap or along your side. Just letting them be. And when you're ready, finding a breath. And wherever that is for you, where you can experience it most vividly. It could be in your belly. As your belly moves just slightly with each breath. It could be in your chest, if you can sense it more vividly there. It could be your throat or your nostrils. Just taking a moment to find breath. Just seeing if you can stay with the whole cycle of breath. If your mind wanders and you go somewhere, that's normal. Just letting that happen and coming back to sensations of breathing. Letting each breath be just as it is. You don't need to make it deeper or slower or change it in any way. You're breathing just fine. Attending to breath the same way you would pay attention to waves if you were at the seashore. You'd watch the waves go out and retreat after it came in. You'd watch the wave come in, spread out along the sand and smooth it out, and then retreat back. And you wouldn't think it should be faster or slower. You just notice the waves. They're perfect just as they are. And when you're ready, seeing if you can bring to your mind's eye somebody that you've lost. It could be recent or it could be long ago. It could be a family member or a close friend. Or it might be a lost relationship, some other kind of significant loss that involves somebody else. And as you recall that person, if you let one come to mind, several may come to mind as we explore. Letting yourself appreciate what you loved about them, what made them special to you. Maybe how they were with you or with other people. Something you value about how they are. It makes you glad to have had them in your life. You might recall a special time you had with them. There may have been just the two of you, or there may have been other people involved. Just remembering where that was and when that was. Who else was around, if anybody? And noticing now in which ways that touched you. It may have been deep and poignant, or it may have been light and funny, just fun to be with them. And if you can imagine them being in front of you right now, seeing if there's anything that comes to mind that if you could say it to them, what would you say? What would you want to say to them? Maybe how you appreciate them, or something that was left unsaid before they went. Or in what ways they were meaningful to you to have had them in your life. And as you imagine saying these things to them, noticing what their reaction is, how it is for them to hear this in your mind's eye. How it is for you to see their reaction. And when you're ready, saying goodbye to that person. There'll be time later in the meditation if you want to come back to that, you can. But for now, we'll say goodbye. And now seeing if you can bring to mind somebody who's in your life now. Somebody you appreciate and love. Somebody you care about. Somebody who cares about you. Somebody who, when you're with them, it feels special in a certain way. It could be a partner or a family member or a good friend or a colleague even. And imagine them being right in front of you and what you might say to them if they were. In what ways you appreciate them. How you're glad to have them in your life. And imagining how they would react if they heard this from you. And there may be things that you haven't said to this person who's in your life now. That you like to have said to them while you still can. And when you're ready, saying goodbye to that person for now. Knowing you can come back either in this kind of a process or in real life with them. The next 10 minutes will be a silent meditation. So you can make it a breath meditation. You can continue with some of the images and things that came up before on the theme that we're talking about tonight. You can make it any kind of meditation you like it to be, and I'll ring a bell at the end of the 10 minutes.